Welcome in, everybody, to a very special version of The Deep End. This is pre-recorded, and we are going to do a bunch of Pastor Reacts segments where we're going to react to some short videos from around the web. A lot of them are theological in nature, a lot of atheist videos we're going to look at. Some of them are crazy, such as robots that deliver your food and something called Time Blindness. And then we're also going to respond to the obligatory LGBTQ madness in our country, particularly trans madness. And so welcome again to your favorite night of the week, The Deep End on Tim Hatch Live. The Deep End. Season 6, Episode 40, Special Edition, The Pastor Reacts. Want to know what a pastor thinks of the crazy madness that's going on in the world? Well, this is the video for you. Make sure that you are hitting that like button, hitting that subscribe button, hitting the notification bell so that we can tell you on your smart device every time we go live. My name is Tim. This is youtube.com/Tim Hatch Live or Tim Hatch Live on TikTok or Tim Hatch Live on Instagram. However you're watching this, Tim Hatch Live on Twitter. Follow all the social media content. Let's get to it. Pastor Reacts. Okay, so this is the first video we're going to look at, and this is an atheist. This is an atheist who is explaining his reasoning for why he doesn't believe in God, and I can't remember the guy's name. I know this guy. He's an English fellow. Anyway, let's watch the video together, and then we will respond.
I'll say bone cancer in children? What's that about? How dare you? How dare you create a world in which there is such misery that is not our fault? It's not right. It's utterly, utterly evil. Why should I respect a capricious, mean-minded, stupid God who creates a world which is so full of injustice and pain? That's what I'd say.
And you think you're going to get in on that?
No, but I wouldn't want to. I wouldn't want to get in on his terms. They're wrong. Now, if I died and it was Pluto, Hades, and if it was the 12 Greek gods, then I would have more truck with it, because the Greeks they didn't pretend not to be human in their appetites and in their capriciousness and in their unreasonableness. They didn't present themselves as being all-seeing, all-wise, all-kind, all-beneficent. Because the God who created this universe, if it was created by God, is quite clearly a maniac, totally selfish. We have to spend our life on our knees thanking him? What kind of God would do that? Yes, the world is very splendid, but it also has in it insects whose whole life cycle is to burrow into the eyes of children and make them blind. They eat outwards from the eyes. Why? Why did you do that to us? You could easily have made a creation in which that didn't exist. It is simply not acceptable. So, atheism is not just about not believing there's a God, but on the assumption that there is one. What kind of God is he? It's perfectly apparent that he is monstrous. Utterly monstrous, and deserves no respect whatsoever. The moment you banish him, your life becomes simpler, purer, cleaner, more worth living.
Well, okay, so this is the classic argument, of course, theodicy, which is the problem of evil and suffering. Why are there insects that would spend their life cycle burrowing from the inside of your eyes outward? And what the atheist in this video, and I wish I remembered his name because I want to show him the due respect of at least acknowledging his name, is suggesting here is that only the bad in our life is enough evidence to prove that there is no God. But then you have to ask yourself, and he does allude to it there for a moment, that you've got to look at the good. Why do we have breathtaking landscapes, majestic mountains, hovering over gorgeous blue oceans and crashing waves and sunsets that blow us away almost every single day and sunrises? You have to look at the good things of your life and say, well, where did that come from? If I'm going to be upset about the evil and say, I don't want to believe in God because of that, well, then what am I going to attribute all the good to? That's first. Number two, the evil, monstrous, capricious God that he has a problem with, obviously he has skipped over a majority of the New Testament text, which discusses the fact that this God became man and then suffered one of the most brutal, agonizing, monstrous, capricious deaths in human history. Yes? I mean, if you want to disbelieve in God, fine. But please take the whole counsel of what Scripture witnesses to regarding the God of the Judeo-Christian paradigm, and that is a God who created it all and did, in fact, create it all perfect without the insects burrowing your eyes out and without the leukemia or bone cancer in children. And we screwed it up. He gave us dominion. He gave us authority. That's the first chapter, the first and second chapter of the Bible. We were created in his image, and then we were created to rule and subdue and tell those insects where to go and tell that snake where to go. And our federal head, Adam, abandoned that opportunity, kept silent while his wife was having a conversation with a talking snake, and then followed her into transgression, and we are living with the results. So again, theodicy to me is always very simple to answer, and this is the final thing I'd like to say about this video. Whenever you find somebody that has a problem with the universe as it is, please ask them, well, then why does it matter at all if there is no God? If there is no God, then your suffering doesn't matter, your sadness doesn't matter, your tears don't matter, because it's just, don't you understand? You're just molecules bouncing around in space somewhere, and it's just an accident, and you're an accident, and you don't matter. But ultimately, everybody knows deep down inside that things matter. Children matter to their parents. Friends matter to their friends. Sunsets matter to people who love creation. I mean, this is not hard to answer, in my opinion. But ultimately what I think, and we're going to see this regularly with our atheist videos here, is that these people want God to not exist, and they will find the evidence, and only half of the evidence, necessary to say he exists, while denying the actual narrative that the Bible reveals. We were given headship. We abandoned headship and dominion and authority. We surrendered it to the devil. He is the author of evil. He has created all of this madness in rebellion to God, and we are living with the consequences. And those consequences point us to the fact that we need somebody to get us out of those consequences. And we can't get out of those consequences. That's what the book of Judges shows. That's what the book of 1st and 2nd Kings shows. That's what all the prophets of the Old Testament show. That's what Samson shows and Gideon shows and David shows. There's got to be somebody better than that. And who is that person who is better than all those people who came and lived a very good life but died and failed to save us from all this misery? Who is that person? It is Jesus Christ. He is the true David who actually defeated our true Goliath death. He is the true Moses who led us out of slavery in Egypt, sin, and brought us into the promise and brings us into the promised land. He is the true Job who suffered for us even though he was innocent, and then interceded and saved us, his friends. And friends, if you don't have Jesus, you don't get it. And I totally understand it. So we don't point people to the existence of God. We point people to Jesus, who claimed to be God and rose from the dead and now lives and rules and reigns as God's only eternal Son. And through him, we have a relationship with him. That's the answer. And it's the gospel. It always works. Okay, Pastor Reacts number 2, another atheist talking about how come he doesn't believe in God. And again, all the language here is pretty standard for atheists on why they're so mad at the non-existent deity, which is just kind of funny. Let's watch this one.
If there is a hell, and if the atheists get to the end of their life and discover, yep, I was wrong, there is a God. This is counterfactual. This is not that I actually believe it. Then you are right. I would then believe and know that there's a God, but that does not mean I would respect or admire a God who would create something like a hell to send someone like me to. And my beloved mother, Patsy Barker, who died as an atheist with a smile on her face, happy that she lived a good life raising 3 good boys. That deity is torturing her in hell, her and Mark Twain and George Gershwin and Elizabeth Cady Stanton and Aaron Copland and Johannes Brahms and Prokofiev, Margaret Sanger, Bertrand Russell, Carl Sagan, wonderful people who lived these lives. You're telling me that the God you love and admire has consigned us to eternal torture? Then I would say to that God, you created hell, you go to hell. If you want to torture me forever, fine. You prove what a big macho man you are. You do not have my respect. Of course, he doesn't exist. Like, this is all hypothetical.
Okay, I love that. Did you see how much anger he was expressing toward this non-existent God, and then had to kind of like backtrack and say, of course he doesn't exist. Deep down, this guy does know that God exists. There's no doubt about it. You don't get angry at something that doesn't exist. You really don't. You don't get angry at a being that doesn't exist. You don't get that angry, okay? A lot of people have imaginary friends they've never been mad at. I mean, at least that mad. Secondly, he makes an assumption about the human condition. And this is what I find is very common with atheists. Atheists do this on a regular basis. They absolve humanity of any moral requirements or any moral culpability in the problems of creation. And then they demonize God totally for all moral corruption. You understand what I'm saying? They're always victims. We humans are perfectly wonderful, just and good. Johannes Brahms and his mother with the smile on her face as an atheist. By the way, unbelievers are usually pretty happy in their unbelief. They're not always miserable. So that's not a proof that unbelief is true. People have been very happy in their sin and still are to this day. It does not necessarily mean they are ultimately right. If a test case for happiness, if a test case for truth is someone's personal happiness, then anybody can be right as long as they're happy. No, happiness does not prove truthfulness. But he's making an assumption, again, about all these people that he mentions that are perfectly wonderful, just and good people. How does he know? You don't know who people really are. You don't even know who I really am. I don't know who you really are. But this is the atheist tactic. Humans are morally free of consequence for their actions. They are morally justified just by being human. And God is the mean, angry monster, the mean, angry sinner. And that is, of course, the mantra of the devil. The devil did not like God's rule. He has rebelled against it to this day, and he has taken many sons and daughters captive to his ideology. But never forget that. Atheists always do this on a regular basis. The God that they believe is totally evil and is responsible for all the evil that we experience. And humans are perfectly moral, just, and good people. And they're victims. They're victims of God's horrible attitude. Again, this is the heart of Satan that puts self before God, that rejects the rule and authority of God and puts myself on the throne. And that's what you have in that video. Okay, going to a famous atheist that I am aware of. This is Neil deGrasse Tyson. And he is a very avid, outspoken scientist, but also a very avid, outspoken atheist. And here he is on the Chelsea Handler Show. And let's listen to what he has to say about the non-existence of God.
The scientist, do you believe in God?
Every description of God that I've heard holds God to be all-powerful, very typical, and all good. And then I look around and I see a tsunami that killed 250,000 people in Indonesia, an earthquake that killed 250,000 people in Haiti, and I see earthquakes and tornadoes and disease, childhood leukemia, and I see all of this and I say, I do not see evidence of both of those being true simultaneously. If there is a God, the God is either not all-powerful or not all good. Can't be both. But I'm evidence-driven more than I'm faith-driven. To be faith-driven is one thing, but to be faith-driven and try to create legislation on that affects other people who don't share your faith, that's the beginnings of a theocracy. And we have evidence of what that is in the past, and our founding fathers specifically founded this country to prevent that from happening.
Okay, so Neil needs to see my special on the founding of America from a couple of weeks ago on July 4th, but I would also take issue with the idea that, again, well, first off, you see, once again, the atheist absolves humanity of any moral culpability, of any moral responsibility for the evil in the world, and puts the blame solely on God. And then again, always finds the evil to disbelieve in God and rejects any good to believe in God. It is, selective evidence. It is putting God on trial according to our limited perspective. And Neil deGrasse Tyson is very fortunate to live in a country where we can fight back against leukemia, fight back against hunger, fight back against the things that tornadoes and cataclysmic events, and help our neighbor and love our neighbor and take out insurance policies against those kind of things happening. And all of that comes from where, Neil deGrasse Tyson? And why don't those things and why don't those capabilities exist in countries that have no Judeo-Christian foundation, such as Mongolia, Siberia, Russia, such as, or communist Russia, I would say, not this Russia, but so many other nations, and particularly in sub-Sahara Africa, where the gods were the imaginations of whatever we thought. Those countries have limited human rights. You go to Muslim countries, very few human rights, very few civil liberties for women, and they're founded on a philosophy. And our American experiment, which was founded on the Judeo-Christian ethic, which wrote its constitution in light of what Scripture reveals about the human condition and the propensity for evil to come from human beings, and therefore checks and balances in our system of government. Why are you in the place where you are, as opposed to a starving child in Africa right now, where there is no assistance, there is no welfare, there is no social safety net? And you have to ask that question, because the foundations, the roots of society do matter. And Americans and Westerners have the profound luxury of being atheists because we very rarely have to deal with the harsh realities of life. We have it pretty good, and then we ultimately think that we have it pretty good because we're so smart, and therefore we don't need God anymore, which again is the heart of the human condition. I'm better than God. I know better. This is what Satan believed, and we rebel and follow, not me, but unbelievers, follow their true father, Satan, into rebellion against God. I wanted to back up and say something here as a scientist. What does he say here? All powerful, all good. Yeah, tsunami again. What did he say? I wanted to look at one thing in particular. Either there is a God. If there is a God, the God is either not all powerful or not all good. Okay. Look at the cross. Neil deGrasse Tyson. He bore the evil of humanity on his back. This is why Christianity really is the only answer to the problem of evil. It really is. Because the Buddhist answer is, of course, there is no God. Hinduism says you have to absolve yourself from desire. So the way to avoid suffering is to just not want anything. And therefore, when things are taken away from you, you've already handled it in your heart that you don't want it anyway. So when it's gone, it's gone. But Christianity rejects both of those and says, no, possessions are a good thing, and having things and enjoying relationships is a good thing. And guess what? God was willing to give up his relationship with his son in that moment on the cross, and do that to bring you into relationship with him, which is what he intended from the very beginning. Evil testifies to the human conscience that the world is not as it should be. And when we start to wrestle with that, when we really dig at that, we have to come to a conclusion that why? We have to come to an answer at least, not a conclusion maybe, but an answer, a question at least that says, why do I see a world that does not seem right? Where does that come from? Where does that why come from? When we do that, we start to scratch the itch that Ecclesiastes talks about. He's put eternity in our hearts, and we seek out what's going on. That's a great video. Now let's get into some crazy videos. Now let's look at some nutso videos. And, we live in an age today where white people can be blamed for everything. The color of your skin, right? This is what Martin Luther King Jr. marched for, right? This was part of his I Have a Dream speech, yes? The color of your skin is the most important part of you. That was the MLK ideal. You would think so, based on what the progressive secularists say. Let's take a look at this lady who believes that 3 meals a day comes from white supremacy and colonialism.
The day thing, breakfast, lunch, and dinner, is from colonialism and white supremacy.
As if we didn't have enough good reasons to stop letting external cues tell us how to feed ourselves and start listening to our internal cues, here's another one. Now, I don't know about you, but I hate when crusty old white men tell me what to do with my life, or especially tell me what to do with my body. So eat what you want, when you want. There are no rules. Start listening to what your body is telling you.
Huh? If you watch TikTok this much, you will be stupider. I'm just letting you know. This is like designed to make you dumb. And remember, the algorithm from the Chinese company that has connections to the CCP is engineering Americans to see videos like this while they're teaching their children in China about the glories of communism and the Chinese government. The doublespeak here is amazing. First off, that you have no rules, but then listen to your body. But if we listen to our body and our body says we have rules, should we listen to the rules of our body if we have rules in the body? Again, there's a lot of Platonic dualism here. There's a lot of Gnosticism here. What do I mean by that? I mean that there is this internal kind of vibe going on and the material doesn't matter. And so we got to listen to the internal vibe and do what that says. And then why is it always crusty old white men? Why in this culture, we have to ask this question on a regular basis. Why is it okay to make racial statements against white people and be platformed? Can this woman ever say, I don't like listening to crusty old black men? I don't like listening to crusty old Jewish men? I mean, she would be, I'm assuming her gender here, deplatformed immediately, canceled immediately. But this is the insanity of the secular progressive mind. White people have a target on their back, and you absolve yourself of any liability when you attack them, based purely on the amount of melanin in their skin. Again, these are people who have flipped the script of the I Have a Dream speech from Martin Luther King Jr. upside down. And the color of their skin and not the content of one's character is the most important part of that person. Martin Luther King Jr. would be rolling over in his grave if he could hear this today. Okay, now to the land of totally victimhood mindset. A young little leftist on TikTok has a problem getting to work on time because of time blindness. This is a thing. Did you know that? Watch.
So I just got yelled at for asking a very reasonable question. So I'm applying to go somewhere, and I just wanted to know, are there accommodations for people who struggle with time blindness and being on time, you know? And then the person I was with interrupted and acted like I was asking something else. And then when we were done, they actually started yelling at me and saying that accommodations for time blindness doesn't exist. And if you struggle with being on time, you'll never be able to get a job. You know, provided you're trying your absolute best to be there. And then they're like, your stupid generation wants to destroy the workplace. And yeah, I think that a culture where workers are just cut off because they struggle with being on time, when there's other solutions that we can look to, I think that just anybody who thinks it's okay to just treat people like that, yeah, that culture needs to be dismantled. And then I asked that person, how can you feel good about yourself upholding this kind of system? And then to think I'm entitled. No, if people think it's okay to treat others like this, that's entitlement.
The lack of self-awareness is real. So I can't get on time. I can't get to the workplace on time because of my condition of time blindness, whatever that is. And if you expect me to do so, you are insensitive to me. But isn't being late to the job being insensitive to those who show up at the job? Again, the lack of self-awareness in this victimhood generation is astonishing. And I do not want to even pretend that this girl speaks for an entire generation. I know a lot of young people her age who show up on time and do a great job at the workplace. And I do not mean to lump every one of her generation in with her view here. This is just a very unparented young girl. I have a feeling there's some mommy and daddy issues behind this content, and I don't want to address it any further than that because to do so would to answer a fool according to her folly. Okay, anyway, moving on. Robots delivering your DoorDash or Uber Eats. Pro or against? Let me know in the comments because this girl freaked out when the robot delivered her food. Let's watch.
Tell me why I placed an order on Uber Eats and they literally told me a robot has your order. So I'm out here waiting for the robot to deliver my food. So guys, I think the robot is glitching. Probably someone tried to touch it or something because it was supposed to be here like 3 minutes ago and now the time just keeps on adding up. Okay, y'all, so here's my robot. What happened to you today? You're late. Okay. All right. So I need to use my phone to open her up. See, that's my name. So it's open now. I just gotta yank it out, take my order. Yeah, so now I have my order. I need to get out of the way. Thank you. Bye. Why are you standing there like that? Guys, she's still here. Oh, and off she goes. Goodbye.
Okay, I really like this. Honestly, I think that this is so cool. I'm a huge fan of technology. If there's new technology coming down the pike, I'm for it. And I hate to say it as simply as that, but I am. The idea that we're going to get robots to do these kind of things for us is really cool, but it's bad news for the gig economy people. And so you might want to think about, I don't know, becoming a plumber or becoming a carpenter or becoming something that, you know, that people are going to need your skill for, and you don't necessarily need to go to college. I need to tell some young people you're a senior in high school, and can I just relieve you of the fact that you do not have to have your whole life mapped out for you? And there might be a job that right now you pay, I don't know, $60,000 to go to school for that a robot might eventually do. So be careful about what you choose and what you think and what you have set up in your mind as like the path to the good life. You don't know the good life. This is why it's so important that you have a relationship with God through Jesus Christ, his son, and you admit that you are a fool and a sinner, and he is wise and all-knowing, and he can hold your hand and lead you in the path and the way in which you should go. Proverbs 3, 5, and 6, trust in the Lord with all your heart, lean not on your own understanding, but in all your ways acknowledge him, and he will direct your paths. And I say this so that someday some robot doesn't take over your job and make you irrelevant. But I do like the idea of a robot delivering my food. Of course, this would only work in an urban environment, I guess, because ultimately, you know, if you're in any kind of suburban environment, I don't see a robot traveling, 5 miles away or 10 miles away to your house from the restaurant. Maybe it could happen. Who knows if these things don't start driving on the road, and then what's going on with the laws of the road after that? And what if we get in an accident with one of these robots, and who's to blame, and I don't know. This brings up a whole new reality of society, but we're headed there, and I don't think there's any stopping it. I don't know. I think it's kind of cool. Okay, let's talk about how do you witness to somebody without telling them that you're witnessing to somebody? And how do you do it masterfully without even letting them in on the fact that you are giving them a college level, master's degree level course in coming to terms with the fact that their own philosophy points them to Jesus Christ? I give you a conversation between a wonderful pastor named John MacArthur from Southern California and a social conservative commentator and Orthodox Jewish person, Ben Shapiro. And in Ben Shapiro's Sunday conversation with John MacArthur, this went down. See if you see what I see. Watch.
What do you think is the key distinguishing factor between the philosophy of Christianity and the philosophy of Judaism?
Well, first of all, I don't like to talk about it as a philosophy. I'd rather talk about it as a revelation because it's divine. So the same God who wrote the Old Testament wrote the New Testament. That's my conviction. The scripture has one author. And I need to say this, I am a Christian because of the Old Testament. Without the Old Testament, I don't know whether I could believe the New Testament. Mm-hmm. And that may sound strange to you, but how do I know that Jesus is the Messiah if I don't have all the predictions of the Old Testament defining him when he shows up? For example, I wrote a book called The Gospel According to God, and it's from Isaiah 53, that great chapter. And you read Isaiah 53, and it's the biography of the Messiah, the servant of the Lord, and it lays out his arrival and his rejection and his death and his resurrection and his ascension and his coronation. It explains the gospel in more specific terms than any chapter in the New Testament. He was wounded for our transgressions. He was bruised for our iniquities. The chastisement for our peace fell on him, and by his wounds we are healed. Wow. That sounds like the Christian doctrine of justification, because that's exactly what it is. And then it says his life was cut off. And then it says he will see his offspring. Well, if his life was cut off, how could he see his offspring? When I die, I'm not going to see my offspring. That's the resurrection. And then you have the coronation. You even have in that chapter a shift, because the chapter begins with the plural we. We saw him and he was like a root out of dry ground. He was like a root sticking up you would trip over. He was like a sucker branch. You whack it off. He was meaningless, useless, and there was no beauty that we would desire him. He didn't fit our messianic picture, and he didn't do what we thought he would do. He didn't knock off the Romans, and he didn't set up the kingdom. He just didn't fit our model, and so we considered him as nothing. And the language there, they considered him as non-existent, and that's exactly what happened, because they completely rejected him, and the Romans took him as a criminal and crucified him. And then you have this stunning reality in that chapter. It's like time stops, and you hear this in the past tense. He was bruised for our iniquities. He was chastised for our peace. Whoa. What happened? Zechariah says, the day will come when they look on him whom they've pierced and mourn for him as an only son. Wow, that's what they will say. Well, that's what the Jewish people will say when they look on the one they pierced and mourn for him as an only son, they'll say, we thought he was stricken by God. We thought we were doing the work of God in taking his life because he was a blasphemer. Now we see he was wounded for our transgressions. He was bruised for our iniquities. And then, says Zechariah, a fountain of blessing is open to Israel and a fountain of salvation. And then you have that followed by the kingdom and all the fulfillment of the old covenant. And all of it comes when Israel looks at the Messiah and sees him for who he is. The interesting thing about Isaiah's prophecy of that is he doesn't say it's going to happen. He doesn't use future verbs. He uses past verbs because he's looking past Christ to when the Jews look back on the past. Now we see it. Now we see it. And the New Testament, Paul says in Romans 11, all Israel will be saved.
Wow. Okay. First off, you've got to see what John MacArthur just did there with Ben Shapiro. Ben Shapiro, and he knows Ben Shapiro, is an Orthodox Jewish man who really believes the Old Testament scriptures, particularly Isaiah 53 and Zechariah chapter 9 and all the Bible verses that he just referenced. And he just issued a masterclass. He literally did what Paul the Apostle did in every synagogue that he went to on the Sabbath day in the first century in the book of Acts, and reasoned from the scriptures that Jesus was the Christ. What scriptures? Not Peter, not 1st and 2nd Peter, not Matthew, not Mark, not John. They weren't written yet. And he's 100% right in saying that you don't believe in the New Testament without the Old Testament. The New Testament is the Old Testament revealed, and the Old Testament is the New Testament concealed. It's just beautiful. So what he does here is he literally just uses all of Ben Shapiro's religious beliefs to prove that Jesus Christ is his Messiah. I love it. Phenomenal job. And, kudos to John MacArthur. He's been doing this a long time, and you got to just respect the beautiful way in which he illustrated that the Christ that Ben was looking for is Jesus, according to Ben's own religious beliefs. That's how you witness to something. That's how you share the gospel. You don't always have to say, okay, the 4 spiritual laws, or, okay, if you were to die tonight. You don't always have to do that. You have to talk to the person from where they are at and acknowledge what they believe and point what they believe is actually pointing to a bigger story. What do they believe is pointing to a bigger story, and that story is God loved you. God sent his son to die for you. God's son rose for you, and belief in his name brings you back into a right relationship with him. It's powerful. Anyway, let's do some cultural reactions. This time, the Barbie movie has been released. Are you going to see it? Let me know in the comments. I don't plan on seeing it, and not for the reasons that you might think. But here's some more reasons why I won't see it. CBN interview of this guy, I don't know who he is, talking about how bad the movie is, how anti-man the movie is. Watch.
Barbie just is terrible. The first few minutes, it's got a bunch of little girls playing with little baby dolls. Now, I've got 17 grandchildren, and the most of them are little girls, and they love playing with baby dolls. And the girls take the baby dolls and bash them and slap them, and we don't have to be mothers anymore. In Barbie land, men are the problem with all of society. It's hardcore feminist. So they've banished men so they have a better life. In fact, Ken is the villain in the movie, and Barbie has to leave because she's not adapting to, this hate of the patriarchal society, although she hates Ken. So men are the villain, and trans, there are a couple of trans people playing characters, Barbies. So, men play better Barbies than women play Barbies, by the way. So you should tell your little girls that if you want to be Barbie, you want to be a swimmer, you want to be anything else in society, men can be women better. That's what the movie's saying. So the doctor in the movie, Dr. Barbie, is a trans, and he was quoted in his interview of saying that this movie is candy with a little bit of poison. And the other trans person said, this is going to finish the gender conversation forever because all the little kids that see it are going to realize that you don't have to be women to be women if there are women, which is really weird to me because I'm, 77 years old. So, I still believe that our DNA and everything else says that I'm a man.
You follow the science, Dr.
I
Bear.
figured out how to be a man. And my wife was practically perfect, and she died last year, and she was wonderful, and she'd always say, "Why are you taking such good care of me?" And I'd say, "It's my privilege to have a wife like you." So
All right, let's talk about this. I'm not totally able to speak to this, except that the Barbie movie seems like a cultural catastrophe, in my opinion. I wouldn't doubt that what he is saying about the movie is true. I'm wondering, a small part of me thinks maybe they are trying to mock the craziness of our culture with regards to how anti-men our culture is becoming, while at the same time men are becoming women. Maybe that's there. I don't know. I might be totally wrong. I haven't seen the movie. I don't plan on seeing the movie. Honestly, I couldn't even stand to sit in a movie theater and watch that movie. But here's the thing. You as Christians and as leaders, I think that it's very important that we acknowledge not only the discord that culture has with Christian truth, but the beauty that is reflected in the Christian gospel, the Christian message, which is that men and women are equal partners, equal sharers of God's gift of life, that they have different abilities and different capacities, and yet they complement each other and they fit together wonderfully. And I think that we have to do a better job in our churches and in our ministries to reflect that, to celebrate the differences. It's kind of ironic that a culture that so desperately wants to celebrate differences, right? Particularly different religions, yeah? But does not want to celebrate the differences of the sexes, the biological sexes and biological genders. There's only two. So kind of doublespeak on our culture's part on a regular basis with regards to the trans identity, in that differences are great. Different religions are great. Different races are great. Different cultures are great. Different sexes, not so great. They can be either or. There's really no difference. Men can become women. Women can become men. And they are basically one big homogenous entity. And that's kind of the doublespeak, because if we are going to celebrate differences in diversity, why do we stop with gender? We should celebrate the differences and the uniqueness of men and women, not try to mold them into one. But of course, this is the attack of the enemy on the pinnacle of God's creation, which is male and female. God created male and female in his image, in his likeness. And so any attack on that distinction is an attack and affront on God's own image, and it comes from the evil one. We must be aware of that and keep your kids away from this nonsense through all means necessary, because the devil clothes himself as an angel of light, right? He will disguise himself as a cute, cuddly movie with destructive heresies underneath. And they do get into your kids' hearts and they affect them. Okay, what about this? Transing the kids is okay. Yes, I said it. Transitioning kids is totally cool, in my opinion, and in the opinion of this guy with the cowboy hat on. And he asks somebody about it, and they don't agree. And I'm shocked. Watch.
So do you think it's okay to transition children?
Yeah.
To Christianity?
No.
Ladies and gentlemen.
We got them. Yeah. Transing the kids to Christianity is not okay. Why? Aren't we just dealing with what they believe deep down inside? Just like you're you're dealing with what they believe deep down inside. Look, if you want to say that a kid can believe something that is completely in conflict with what his physicality says, and he can believe that he's a girl, even though all evidence to the contrary, because he believes it, and we then must transition the body to that, to align with what he believes, then why can't we mess with what he believes? If you can mess with the body, why can't we mess with what he believes? Again, this sounds like Gnosticism or Platonic dualism. The flesh doesn't matter. It's whatever's inside that counts. And the first century church wrestled with this big time. The reason why they wrestled with it is because there are these fleshly desires that we wrestle with. There are these fleshly tendencies that we wrestle with, and we don't know how to rationalize it with our faith that rejects those fleshly tendencies. And so how do we live comfortably in our own skin when our skin is at war with us? Well, we take thoughts captive. We get in community. We repent of our sins. We acknowledge the failures of our flesh with others. We seek God. We ask for the Holy Spirit to fill us and align our hearts and what we believe with what he says. And that is a work of the Spirit, and there is no arguing people into it. You must introduce them to Christ in order for them to get it. Anyway, that was just kind of a funny video, in my opinion. So people are not liking the trans movement, the sexualization ideology in our culture, and there's a pushback. There's a pushback almost everywhere. And a woman on a subway bus, I think it was in London, decided to push back and tear down a bunch of posters on the subway bus. Why are there posters for transsexualism and pansexualism on a subway bus? That should be our first question. But this woman said, no mas, and good for her. Watch.
No, it's not. It's wrong.
This is propaganda.
Yeah.
This is
Normalizing.
It's affecting
Yeah.
the next generation.
Yeah.
I don't know why no one sees this.
No.
This is disgusting.
Because TV told them not to get upset. Look at that. That's pretty good. Look at this one. Romantic.
What is that on there for? Honestly, good for her.
Nicely done, babe. Nicely done.
Divide and conquer. That's what the Chinese want. They're trying to divide and conquer us. The government is against us, and you guys don't see it. You guys think that you take a vaccine and this is going to go away? It's never going to go away.
This is great.
So we, the people, say we don't want this anymore.
Thank you.
Wow. She's got more guts than a man. God bless her. Tear it down. And don't stand for it anymore. Speak up. God is for you. Some Christians have got to remember that. God is for you, you know? So when you stand up for him, he stands up for you. And I think too many Christians are silent and complicit. We've got to speak up. We've got to tear these ideologies down and be willing to bear the consequences. Now, we can do it with love and respect, but sometimes in the case of this woman, I actually give her kudos. Destruction of property, you say? Some property needs to be destroyed. Ideology that destroys human beings, that needs to be destroyed. We took down the Nazis for that very reason. We took down the Soviet Union for that very reason. Because ideologies that are devoid of the biblical sensibilities and ideologies of God and fundamental doctrines of God will destroy human beings. That is a fact. Okay. This is an interesting video to look at. A teacher at RYE College has a meltdown at year 9 pupil who questions why another student is identifying as a cat. Only in 2023 will we hear statements like that. Here we go.
You just really upset someone. Saying things like should be in an asylum.
I didn't say that. I just said if they want to identify as a cat or something, then they're like genuinely on that. Then they've gone. Yeah, they're crazy.
You were questioning their identity.
No, I wasn't a questioner. I was just saying about the gender. I didn't say anything about them.
But where did you get this idea from that there's only 2 genders?
I just think it's my opinion. That is my opinion. If I respect their opinion, can't they respect my opinion?
It is not an opinion.
Yes, it is.
It's not an opinion you can have.
Loads of people think there's only 2 genders.
There's only a boy and a girl.
Literally. There's no other private part. There's only 2.
Gender is not linked to the parts that you were born with. Gender is about how you identify, which is what I said right from the very beginning of the lesson.
I just don't agree with that. So why should
This is insane that the teacher is spending all this time having an argument about gender and ideology and identity according to one's own belief about themselves in a schoolroom. You know what's not happening here? Math is not being taught. Civics are not being taught. The Constitution of, I think, the UK here is not being taught. So we wonder why this happens. This is demonic as well. The devil doesn't just come out with his pitchfork and pointy tail and horns and poke at you. He wants to dumb you down. He wants to keep you ignorant. He wants to keep you ignorant of what shaped your culture and made your culture what it was. He wants to keep you ignorant of your rights as a citizen because he ultimately wants to control you. And an ignorant population is far more controllable than a knowledgeable one. And so you have this, and I'm not even going to play the whole thing, but it just goes on for how long? How long is that? 2 minutes. 2 minutes? Yeah, no, 3 minutes long. Back and forth in classroom about gender identity instead of teaching science, teaching math, teaching biology, teaching kids skills that help them get ahead. That's the problem with the educational system, and that's why you got to tune into this channel. The Deep End is back next Tuesday night, and I look forward to being with you guys. Hey, until that time, check out timhenchlive.com for the new swag and the new t-shirts, and support the channel, timhenchlive.com/support or timhenchlive Cash App. I'm so glad that you guys were here. God bless you. Have a great night.